Hello everybody and welcome to our module on chronic pancreatitis and pancreatic cancer. Chronic pancreatitis is much less common than acute pancreatitis, and chronic pancreatitis occurs when fibrosis and calcification develop in the pancreas as a result of multiple recurrent bouts of acute pancreatitis. In adults, this is usually the result of alcohol consumption, and in children, this is usually from cystic fibrosis. Many causes of acute pancreatitis are not recurrent like gallstones, but alcoholism in adults and cystic fibrosis in children are two causes of acute pancreatitis that recur, and therefore they tend to lead to chronic pancreatitis. There is a classic CAT scan finding of chronic pancreatitis, which is calcification in the pancreas. I'm circling the pancreas with my pen. You can see white spots in the pancreas. That's from calcium deposition. This is an abdominal CAT scan. You can always find the pancreas just anterior to the aorta here, which is always right in front of the vertebral body. And when it's filled with calcium like this, that is a finding of chronic pancreatitis. Patients with chronic pancreatitis suffer from chronic abdominal pain. That's the hallmark of the condition. The pain may wax and wane, and it may be worse after meals because when you eat a meal, you stimulate the pancreas. For this reason, these patients sometimes develop a fear of eating, which can lead to weight loss. These patients are often very well known to their physicians and to emergency rooms because of their chronic abdominal pain. They often require regular dosages of narcotics to treat the abdominal pain, and they sometimes present to their physicians or to the ER asking for more narcotics. You can measure the serum levels of amylase and lipase, but they're not that helpful. They may be mildly elevated or normal. They are not markedly elevated like you see in acute pancreatitis. One of the reasons measurement of these enzymes isn't that helpful is because the fibrosis in pancreatitis often leads to a loss of production of enzymes. Essentially, the condition chews up the pancreas, so there aren't enough cells around to produce high levels of amylase and lipase. There are a number of complications of chronic pancreatitis, but two of them that you should definitely know for step one are splenic vein thrombosis and pancreatic insufficiency, and we'll talk about these in the next two slides. This slide shows the portal vein in pink. I'm drawing a line through it with my pen, and you may know that the portal vein drains blood from the intestines to the liver via the superior and inferior mesenteric veins. But you should also know that it drains blood from other places as well. It drains blood from the spleen via the splenic vein. It also drains blood from the stomach via the left gastric vein, which is sometimes called the coronary vein. Not shown in this picture is the pancreas, which runs right below the splenic vein where I'm drawing with my pen. So the inflammation of chronic pancreatitis can involve the splenic vein, and that can lead to a thrombosis here, which obstructs the drainage of blood from the spleen. When that occurs, it will dilate blood vessels that connect between the left gastric vein and the splenic vein, and this will lead to the presence of varices in the stomach, and I've written that here for you. A splenic vein thrombosis results in gastric varices via engorgement of short gastric veins, which are connections between the left gastric vein and the splenic vein. The way this will present is a patient with chronic pancreatitis who develops an upper GI bleed and has an enlarged spleen on physical exam, and endoscopy will show gastric varices. That patient is suffering from a splenic vein thrombosis, which is a well-described complication of chronic pancreatitis. You don't need to know this for step one, but there is an interesting treatment for this condition, and that is splenectomy. As you know, we can survive without our spleens, and by taking away the spleen, you take away much of the blood that is draining into the splenic vein, and you relieve the engorgement of these short gastric veins. Pancreatic insufficiency can also result from chronic pancreatitis. This is where you lose the exocrine and endocrine functions of the pancreas due to destruction of the tissue. Essentially, you have burned out the pancreas and it can't perform its normal functions any longer. When the pancreas isn't working, you won't have enzymes to absorb fat, so there will be fat malabsorption and steatorrhea. You may see deficiencies of the fat-soluble vitamins, and then you may also see diabetes, and this is because of loss of insulin production from the pancreas. Now let's talk about pancreatic cancer, and the reason we're talking about it in the module with chronic pancreatitis is because chronic pancreatitis is an important risk factor for pancreatic cancer, as we'll see in a minute. Pancreatic cancers are adenocarcinomas, and they are more common at the head of the pancreas. If we look at the picture on this slide, this is the tail of the pancreas, and this is the head is where most pancreatic tumors develop. The head is also where bile drains into the duodenum, so this means that most pancreatic tumors are going to obstruct the flow of bile, and therefore they will cause jaundice. Pancreatic cancer is a very bad cancer. It carries a poor prognosis. It is usually metastatic at presentation. Most patients who have this cancer will die from the malignancy. If your lymph nodes are positive for cancer cells, you have a 5-year survival of only 10%. If your lymph nodes are negative, you have a 5-year survival only slightly higher at 25%. Patients with pancreatic cancer often present with vague abdominal pain and weight loss, but the classic presentation is called painless jaundice. This occurs because bile flow is obstructed by the tumor, as we saw before, and there's no pain because there's the absence of an abrupt obstruction and inflammation like you might see with a gallstone. Essentially, the tumor grows slowly, and this gradually leads to jaundice. I have unfortunately met a number of patients in my career with new onset pancreatic cancer. They present saying that they are tired with yellowing of the skin. That is a very scary and ominous presentation. This is a picture of a man with jaundice on the screen here. You can see that his skin is yellow. You can also see other signs of biliary obstruction in pancreatic cancer, things like dark urine and clay-colored stools and potentially steatorrhea. Cavassier's sign is a classic physical exam finding for pancreatic cancer. Cavassier's sign is an enlarged non-tender gallbladder in the setting of jaundice. The gallbladder is enlarged because the tumor is obstructing bile flow, but it's not inflamed like you see in cholecystitis. In addition, there's jaundice from the obstruction of biliary flow. Trousseau's syndrome is a classic syndrome that occurs in pancreatic cancer. Trousseau's syndrome is also called migratory superficial thrombophlebitis. And if you know what each of these words mean, it's easy to understand the syndrome. So it's called migratory because it comes and goes in different locations on the body. It's called superficial because it occurs just below the skin. And it's called thrombophlebitis because it involves thrombosis and inflammation of veins. Essentially, this presents as redness and induration on the skin that migrates. So the patient will have redness and induration, for example, on their leg, and then it will go away, and a few weeks later it will occur in their arm, and then a few weeks later it will occur in the other leg. That is migratory superficial thrombophlebitis, characteristic of Trousseau's syndrome, and this is all due to the hypercoagulable state of pancreatic cancer. I've written some of the risk factors for pancreatic cancer on the screen here. The strongest risk factors are age greater than 50 or smoking. Diabetes is also a risk factor, and as I said before, chronic pancreatitis is an important risk factor, especially if it's been present for more than 20 years. Interestingly, pancreatic cancer is not strongly associated with alcohol intake. You might think because alcohol can cause acute pancreatitis that alcoholics would have high rates of pancreatic cancer. That is not necessarily true unless they first develop chronic pancreatitis. Alcoholics who don't develop chronic pancreatitis, it's unclear whether they are at a high risk of pancreatic cancer. The studies have shown mixed findings. There are some data that say that heavy drinking, more than 3 drinks a day, increases risk. I've put a review article on the bottom of the screen here if you want to read more about the complex association between alcohol and pancreatic cancer. But a classic trick board question is to ask you for a risk factor for pancreatic cancer and have alcohol among the choices. That is usually not the correct choice. It's usually one of these other things I've listed on the screen here. There is an association between mutations in the BRCA2 gene and pancreatic cancer. The BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes code for DNA repair proteins, and mutations in these genes are associated with the development of breast and ovarian cancer. They get their name BRCA for their association with breast cancer. Mutations in the BRCA2 gene, however, are also associated with pancreatic cancer, and this association is particularly strong among people of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. This is a picture of 2 Jewish men on the screen here to remind you of this association. There are some advocates who say when any person of Ashkenazi Jewish descent is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, that family should be screened for BRCA2 mutations because they are so common among that population. There are 2 tumor markers that can be measured in the serum of patients with pancreatic cancer. The first one is CA19-9, which is cancer-associated antigen 19-9. It has a specificity of about 70 to 90% and a similar sensitivity. Sometimes this tumor marker is negative, especially in smaller tumors. It's not useful for diagnosis because the sensitivity and specificity are not high enough. However, you can measure a baseline level and then follow it after treatment, and if the level begins to rise, that suggests that the malignancy is recurring. A second tumor marker is CEA, which stands for carcinoembryonic antigen. This can be elevated in pancreatic cancer, but also in other malignancies. It has a poor sensitivity and specificity, and in modern clinical practice, this has largely been replaced by CA19-9. I mentioned the BRCA2 gene mutation association with pancreatic cancer before, but there are some other genetic associations with pancreatic cancer. The first one is the KRAS gene on chromosome 12. Mutations in this gene are seen in 90% of pancreatic cancers. This is the most frequently mutated gene in pancreatic cancer. You may know that mutations of this gene are also part of the adenoma carcinoma sequence for colon cancer, which I talk about in the module on colon cancer. A second genetic association is the SMAD4 gene on chromosome 18. This is a tumor suppressor gene, and it is inactivated in 60% of pancreatic cancers. The treatment of pancreatic cancer is complex. It may involve chemotherapy or radiation, or it may involve surgery. The classic procedure is called the Whipple procedure, which is also called a pancreatoduodenectomy. This is a picture of the Whipple procedure on the screen here. On the left side of the screen is the normal anatomy, and everything marked in blue here is removed as part of the Whipple procedure. After it is removed, the pancreas is hooked directly into a portion of the small bowel. The bile duct is then connected to that small bowel, and the stomach is connected to that small bowel. And this allows you to basically remove the head of the pancreas and reconnect everything so that bile will drain and so that pancreatic enzymes can get into the small intestine. And that concludes our module on chronic pancreatitis and pancreatic cancer.